Good morning. Acts day 9, chapter 17 and 18. A couple of days ago, we raised the subject of the witness of creation and how that is the place to start with people who have absolutely no exposure to Christianity, to the Old Testament scriptures, and can't place the life and death and resurrection of Jesus within the story that many of us just kind of grow up in. How do you witness to a secular world? And the point we made a couple of days ago was start with the witness of creation. I'm going to read to you a couple of verses from the book of Romans so that theologically or in principle you can get the point I'm making here as Paul teaches it. And then we're going to see today Paul actually use this principle in evangelism. So we're actually going to see it in action today, and we're going to see what the content of this sort of pre-evangelism, we may call it, is, although it is actually just part of evangelism. Okay, so let's read Romans chapter 1 and from verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. Okay? So Paul says that all human beings have a level of knowledge about God. God has revealed himself to all people. Doesn't matter where they are. And yet, people suppress this truth in unrighteousness. They turn away from it. They block their ears. And they carry on in the course of rebellion and sin in which they live. That is the state of the human race. Paul continues, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen. His invisible attributes, things that make up God's person and character and nature, things you can't see with your eyes, are revealed to all people through the things that can be seen. Through the things that he's made, okay? Being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. I hope you get the point of what Paul is saying there. That all men know there's a God. And there are certain things about this God that we all know. And it is made manifest to us from the things that he's made. Now, if we were to ask, well, what is it that content of what people actually do know? What do they know? Innately. And how has God made the human mind to be a receptacle, we might call it, a sponge that unavoidably absorbs certain knowledge about God? We all know certain things. Well, that's what we're going to see in Acts chapter 17 today as Paul goes to Athens and he gets an opportunity to preach at Mars Hill, or the Areopagus, where the philosophers would gather. He's invited to come in amongst the philosophers and he gets to preach. I mean, what would you say if you were invited to a completely heathen, secular group of philosophers and they said, come and speak to us? Where would you start? Well, this is where Paul starts, with the witness of creation. And I want us to work our way through his sermon. We'll start in verse 22, and then I'm going to stop as we go along and make the point about what men do know as we head through the sermon. This is absolutely brilliant preaching. So then Paul stood up in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship, without knowing, him I proclaim to you. Now, I want to remind you of what it had said in verse 16. Paul got to Athens, and it said, while he was waiting for Silas and Timothy to meet him, because he had sent word for them to come down and meet him, it says his spirit was provoked within him when he saw the city was given over to idols. He was grieved by all these idols. So now he's standing in front of the Areopagus. The first thing he does is he points to one of these idols. He says, well, I perceive you're very religious, because I found an idol here that was a shrine to the unknown God. Well, okay, the unknown God, the God that you do not worship, knowing, I'm going to declare him to you. So he launches off a platform which he finds. Quite clever. Okay, God. He starts with God. Right, now, how can we start with God? Don't we need to prove the existence of God? Don't we need to argue for the existence of God? No, all human beings know there is a God. You don't have to justify the fact that there is a God to people when you're talking to them. They know there's a God. God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. Now just remember that these are all things that the witness of creation speaks to people. So God is alive and he fills the universe. His eyes are on us and he sees us all. So this is something that everybody knows. When they see creation, it is obvious that there is a God. This didn't just pop out of nowhere, okay? But it's more than that. It's that he didn't just create it and then disappear. His eyes are upon us. He is ever present. He cannot be contained in things that are made. He is greater than the universe that he created, and he still exists today. He is alive today, and his eyes are upon us. People know this. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life and breath and all things. He still gives life to all. No life on this earth exists outside or independent of God. Again, God did not just create the physical universe and then disappear, and then life kind of somehow spontaneously, just by accident, evolved from this physical rock that he created. No, God created life. God created life, and he gives still today life and breath and all things to all his creatures. He is the source of all life, and we live and breathe in him. We exist in him. He's not some far off God who has disappeared. He is presiding over the world he made, and in fact it is him that gives you every breath you breathe. That's how intimately involved this God is. All people know this. When Paul says these words, it is resonating with what they know already. He's just bringing it up to their conscious mind and reminding them of it. This is what the witness of creation does. Verse 26, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and he has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Human beings in particular are his conception. He made us. So it's not just that life in general was conceived by God on this world. God created human beings specially. We are the crowning piece of his creation, and he is the Lord of history. He is intimately involved with how the world is unfolding, with the story of our world. His power and wisdom are no less today than the day that he created everything. He is just as powerful and he is just as wise as he was the day he created the world, and that power and wisdom have not been lying dormant ever since he made the world. No, Indeed, his power and his wisdom have been directing the very course of history. God's wisdom is unfolding the history of this world. God is more present and involved than perhaps you have given him credit for. Just remember, these are all points that Paul is making from the witness of creation, that all men's minds resonate with this when they see the expanse of the universe and the order of it and the beauty of creation. Something in them knows there is a God who created human beings. He is a personal being. He's not some force. He is a person. And he gave life to me, and he gives life to everything around me. And he is ever present, brooding over the world and directing the course of its history. He is greater than the world, and he is greater than the history of it, and he can control it. All people know this. So from verse 27, God has determined the pre-appointed times and boundaries of when each person lives and where they're born, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. See, Paul says here that the witness of creation has already done its work in some of your own poets. It's proof that all human beings know this, because even some of the Greek poets were saying it. We are his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art or man's devising. You know that an idol is nothing, says Paul. We can know God. Everybody knows this. We can know him. He's a personal being. And he wants us to know him. But we have to know him in truth, as he truly is, not as we shape him to be. We need to seek God humbly. You cannot create a God of your own. You need to submit to God as he is. You need to seek him. This might seem like a deeply theological point, but it's actually just simple. It's obvious. Paul is saying, you know there's a God, and you're busy worshipping him in idols of stone, and actually you know that that's complete nonsense. You know when you look at the universe that that thing's got nothing to do with the God that made all of this. Continues in verse 30. Truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness. By the man whom he has ordained, he has given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. Okay, so now Paul now turns from using the witness of creation to appealing to the witness of conscience. Now this is the second thing that Paul picks up in the book of Romans. We didn't read it this morning, but Paul says that all human beings know that they are sinning against God, and they know that they are deserving of judgment because of their sin. There is not only a witness of creation to all human beings, there is a witness of conscience. God has given every person a conscience, and when we sin, we know we are sinning. And it's not just we know we're doing something bad, we know we're sinning against the one who made us. And this is where Paul now goes. He has used the witness of creation to get them to the point where it is now fresh in their minds that you know there is a God. You know he made all things. You know he is presiding over history. You know he gives you life and breath and all things. And you know he is a personal being and that he can be known. And that you need to humble yourself and seek him. And the second thing Paul now says is, you also know that you have sinned against him, and a day of judgment is coming. So here's the point. God is a moral being. This God we've been speaking about, the God that you know in your heart, you also know this. He's a moral being. In his creation there is right and there is wrong. And there is rebellion and sin against him. And you yourself know that you have rebelled and sinned. And therefore you must repent. All of this people know. Having built upon the witness of creation, Paul now turns to the witness of conscience and then immediately to the witness of history. Now, having built his argument on creation and what all people know, and conscience, that they know they've sinned, he now points to the next thing that all people can know if they do their research. There is an event of human history. And this is once you've got to this point, if you're witnessing to someone, point to the historicity of the resurrection. The resurrection then becomes the central part of the message, and the point that Paul makes is it is an historical event. And if you do your homework, you will find that there is not a historian on the planet who denies the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago. We have more evidence of the resurrection than we do of any ancient historical event. It is the most stubborn fact of human history. This man rose from the dead. And Paul now draws a line between the resurrection, the event, and the fact that this was proof that the day of judgment was coming. Now, it is the connection between those two things that now needs to be explained. That is what we would call in our modern day the gospel. How is the resurrection of Jesus related to the fact that God is a moral being and he's going to judge the world? Well, it's the story of how God sent his Son into the world to take the sin of the world upon himself, to suffer the punishment of men upon himself on the cross so that they could be forgiven. And then because his sacrifice was accepted, God raised him from the dead. That's the message. But that's what Paul will then go on to reason with them. He had got their attention through appealing to the witness of creation and the witness of conscience and the witness of history. And now he waits for them to come. And some of them come. It says, when they had heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, we will hear you again on this matter. He's just put bait in the water. And boom, and a few now have bitten. He hasn't explained the intricacies of the gospel yet and how they can be saved. But he has got himself to a point where he can preach to a completely heathen, uneducated audience, where now they want to know about the resurrection and what it means. This is brilliant pre-evangelism. Okay, I think I've made my point, and I think there's much we can learn here, even in our personal conversations with people that we feel aren't ready for the gospel. Use the witness of creation and all that men know about God innately. Use the witness of conscience and the witness of history, and wait for intrigue so that they want to know about the resurrection. Well, God bless you. See you tomorrow.